You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Helen Mackenzie and today is Friday, July 29th, 2022.
6.
Did you know that while companies spend more than $2 trillion on mergers and acquisitions every year, it's reported that between 70 and 90% fail? Wow, that's a lot, isn't it? And I bet you're wondering, can procurement help reduce that failure rate? Join us on August 23rd at our next AOP Live, where KPMG's Chris McCarney and Marcos Cortes will share their expertise and answer live audience questions about how procurement can improve the effective ROI of mergers and divestments and even speed up time to value. If there's a chance that your company may make an acquisition in the near future, or be acquired, or spin off one or more business units, this is an event you won't want to miss. Use the link in the show notes or head on over to artofprocurement.com to register for the event.
5.
Data is such an important asset for procurement, isn't it? We now have access to data from all sorts of sources, but using it for something fundamental to our value proposition, like managing risk, means we need to get the data sources right. In this week's podcast, Joseph Yakura, founder of the International Association for Data Quality Governance and Analytics, gives us advice on where to start.
You can't eliminate risk, but try to mitigate the risk. The challenge is that today, I'm not sure most supply chain functions have a real thorough, in-depth understanding of their data sources. What I mean by that is there are multiple sources of information, whether it be internally generated within the company, within the division, within that brand. Then you go to the supply chain, then you go to the regulatory requirements that are starting to build up around supply chain. So when we look at trying to get our hands around the data, typically we used to look at an organization based on people, process, and technology. Well, now that fourth element that has to be included is the data. So most companies have massive amounts of data, multiple sources. What I would recommend for somebody to start, and to start small, because even if you're a small organization, when you start getting into this, it has tentacles and it becomes very large. Yeah. I would say that starts initially with doing what term we call is a data audit. And at our association website, and I think we're going to have it at a valuable website soon too, is a guidelines on how to conduct a data audit. That's not an IT audit. That's a critical point because that'll raise a lot of questions and thoughts on, okay, who's in charge of data? How often is it if data has a shelf life? Who makes those decisions? Who disperses the data? When and how can it be used, etc. And then the next thing that has to happen, because if you do a data audit, that's only one small point of time. As we know, the volume of data is increasing, the velocity, it's huge. So that one point in time gets contaminated with other data, bad data, or incomplete data, et cetera, very quickly. So I think from starting with a data audit to understand kind of where you are, that should then immediately evolve into a data governance policy. And we need to have governance in the sense of, guidelines as to what data can be used for what decision, what sources are approved or not approved, what sources do we buy data from versus we just collect it. So you have to start there because it's such an overwhelming task. So my recommendation would be is you would start with a data audit just to get that overall awareness, start with a small project, and then put in a data governance strategy so that as data comes in, you now have confidence in the data. The problem with today's world, and it's not getting necessarily better, it's just becoming more surfaced, the tools that are out there are fabulous. The tools work great. It's the data that goes into the tool that is the problem. And until you can correct that, you're not going to get the benefit out of these very, very powerful applications that are out there. So that's how I would recommend starting a data audit. You're not going to audit the whole organization. You'll audit a small portion. Understand the complexity of the issue, and then move to a data governance plan.
You can hear the full conversation between Joseph, Ivalua's Vishal Patel, and Art of Procurement's very own Kelly Barner on the latest podcast episode, wherever you listen to podcasts.
4.
Market intelligence reports are great, aren't they? There's so much in them that we can use. But I remember when I first had access to them for my category, to be honest, I felt a little bit overwhelmed by the richness of the information that they contained. And although I knew that information was really useful, I didn't always take action based on it. I was suffering from something known as the knowing-doing gap. Yikes! Now, the knowing-doing gap was a concept developed in the late 1990s by Stanford University professors Jeffrey Pfeiffer and Robert Sutton. Now, this concept looks at the gap between what people know needs to be done and what they do in practice. Now, one of the ways I bridged that gap was to find out how other people have used the data in the reports and how analytics have been applied in a similar market. And from that, I discovered loads of strategies and techniques that I could use in my own categories. That gap was closed. So why not head on over to artofprocurement.com and you may find just the thing you need to help you narrow your knowing-doing gap.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
Do you have a go-to approach you turn to when facing disruption? Do you rely on suppliers? Do you revisit your strategies? Well, my colleague Philip Eidson is running a poll over on LinkedIn to find out what you do. And we're going to be using the answers as part of our Category Palooza session with Tanya Manning-Grant. So make sure you tell us what you do by clicking on the link in the show notes and casting your vote.
2.
Now, keeping with the mergers and acquisitions theme from earlier in this episode, this story in supply management caught my eye. UK retailer Marks & Spencer's has decided that vertical integration for its food supply chain is the way forward, and it's acquired Gist Limited, the principal contracts logistics provider to Marks & Spencer's Food. CEO Stuart Mackin stated that M&S had acted decisively to acquire Gist, taking control of our food supply chain for the first time in our history. This is the first step in a multi-year plan which will transform the entire supply chain. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what the next steps are in that multi-year plan and what they turn out to be. Meanwhile, whilst I was on my holidays in England, temperatures reached sweltering levels last week and there were supply challenges in the energy market. The BBC reported that Britain paid the highest price on record for energy last week to avoid a power blackout. National Grid paid £9,724 per megawatt hour, and that's more than 5,000% higher than the typical price, and that was to a provider in mainland Europe on Wednesday to prevent South East London losing power. And with that sort of impact on costs, it's difficult to see how this won't have a knock-on effect on the price paid by consumers and businesses for their power.
1.
I was delighted to return from my holidays to find that we've over 500 people registered to join us for a Category Palooza, and we're not even in August yet. So if you've not registered yet, sign up now to join us for our live, virtual and free festival of category level insight and inspiration. Now, at Category Palooza, we'll have discussion, debate and the opportunity to engage in real time with our speakers, the other attendees and, of course, the whole of the Art of Procurement team. Category Palooza is on August 11th from 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and I can't wait to see you there. Just go to artofprocurement.com/calendar to find out more. And you can find out all the links associated with the stories mentioned today at the show notes page for this episode at artofprocurement.com/podcast.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.